nations as states may be judged like individuals who, living in the natural state of society, that is to say uncontrolled by external laws, injure one another through their very proximity. Every state, for the sake of its own security, may, and ought to, demand that its neighbor should submit itself to conditions similar to those of the civil society, where the right of every individual is guaranteed. This would give rise to a federation of nations which, however, would not have to be a state of nations. Immanuel Kant. To Kant, war is the greatest evil that humanity is suffering from. And this is true not just because of the outer bloodshed, the bloodshed between the nations that are at war with one another, but also the nations are suffering from war on the inside. Because Kant says as long as there is war, the nations, the states are forced to constantly be ready for war, to constantly arm themselves, which of course takes up a lot of resources, a lot of money, that could otherwise, if there was no threat of war, be spent on other things, right? So Kant literally says there's no money for the education, right? The princes of Europe, they don't want to pay for schools because they have to pay for their armies. And of course, nowadays, 200 years later, or more than that, this is still very much true. This is still very much relevant. And Kant says that all the advancements of culture, and when Kant says culture, he basically means technology. I will address that at a later point when I get to his anthropology. But the word culture did not yet have the meaning it has today. Rather, by culture, Kant means the advancements in our tools, our technology. Those advancements largely are used for war, largely are used to advance the means of killing one another, rather than advancing our way of life. And not only that, there's also the issue that war on the outside, or even just the threat of war, has an influence on the state on the inside. So Kant is for a republic, not for a despotic state. I discussed the difference in its own lecture. But he also acknowledges that when you are surrounded by other despotic states that threaten you with war, in certain circumstances, maybe a despotic state can defend itself better. And he acknowledges that as long as there's war, it can be harder to get to or to maintain a republic. The republic would thrive best in peace. So if we don't want to live under despotism, even just for that reason, we should want to live in peace. I mean, if there's war, you need someone being in charge, being in command. You will also probably have measures that limit freedom, like, for example, people will get drafted, or maybe there won't be elections for a time. Maybe they need to be postponed because in war times you cannot have elections. I mean, nowadays people have accused Ukraine of being a dictatorship for that very reason, but I mean, this is normal and makes sense. And there's a number of states that would behave the same in wartime, that also have such laws that say if there's a war, then there are no regular elections. Or likewise, if there's a war, maybe freedom of speech will be restricted. Maybe you will be restricted in how much you can criticize the war or the government or whatever. So wars are not just a problem externally, not just a problem for the people dying in them. They are also a problem internally. And I also talked in my previous lecture about how Kant says that even if within a state you have laws and you have the rule of law, and you have a certain degree of civilization that was accomplished, outside in how we deal with other nations and how we behave in war, we may still be the greatest barbarians, because civilization is not moralization. It is just the outer conduct, outer decency, outer decorum, but not necessarily inner goodwill. And so when you are outside of your civilization and of your society, of your laws, you may behave as a barbarian. And so wars cultivate a barbaric attitude in people, prevent the moral progress of humanity. And then this barbarism that you practiced against your enemies, that barbarism, now that you got used to it, might come back home. Those who became barbarians in war, when they come home from the war, they probably stay barbarians. Here I also, in that previous lecture, I mentioned that Hannah Arendt, in a way, describes totalitarianism as barbarism that is practiced towards one's own people. And she describes it in a way as imperialism, which the Europeans first practiced elsewhere, like in Africa, coming home. And the Nazis and the Bolsheviks treating Europe itself, particularly Eastern Europe, as an imperial territory. And she describes that this is the great danger, especially if there's no clear distinction, no clear separation, like an ocean, between the metropole and the imperial territory, as it was in the British Empire, but rather, like in the case of Germany or Muscovy, there is no clear line, because you have a land empire. Which is the case nowadays with Israel and the West Bank, right? They practice barbarism there, and then this lawlessness and this barbarism comes back home, because home in their case is even just half an hour drive by car away. And that's what you have with the judiciary reforms of the current Israeli government, that essentially try to turn Israel proper into another West Bank, and to start treating their own people like they are already treating the Palestinians. So this is a danger that is always there when you live in states of war and practice conquest and so on. And so this is precisely why war is such a great issue, while war is such a great evil. And of course, there is also the direct bloodshed, the direct killing of one another. And Kant considers war the greatest evil humanity is suffering from, even in his day, even in the 18th century, even though looking back and looking at history as a whole, we have to acknowledge that in the 18th and 19th centuries, you had maybe some of the most harmless wars you ever had. I mean, sure, it was still war. Soldiers were still dying, um, but for a large part, it was only soldiers dying. I mean, if you look at earlier times, like antiquity or the Middle Ages or whatever, um, war could mean entire people being slaughtered or driven into slavery. War could mean that if a city was conquered, it was burned and looted, and there were rapes and killings. Um, and even just 1 century prior to Kant, so in the 17th century, you had the 30 Years' War in Germany, where there was plundering of the countryside by the armies that fed themselves through plundering. There were cities that were sacked and burned and the people slaughtered. Um, and then, if you look at later times, like the 20th century and our century, um, their wars turn ever more terrible. Largely, of course, also because of the advancement of the technologies of war. I mean, if you look at statistics of wars from the First World War to the Second World War to Vietnam to Iraq to Gaza, you can see that the percentage of civilians killed as opposed to combatants is steadily rising. Wars are not just fought between armies anymore. That well, shoot at each other on an open field where just soldiers are killing each other, but rather wars are now fought by bombing cities with civilians. There's now weapons like nuclear bombs that were dropped on Japan, and especially now nowadays we have wars being fought through drones, wars being fought with AI even, right? I mean, look at what Israel is doing in Gaza, where it employed an AI such as Lavender that would try to assess whether someone belongs to Hamas, right? Checking, okay, this guy went to school with someone we know is now in Hamas. This guy has a cousin who last week had a phone call with someone from Hamas. So there's so and so high percentage of chance that he is also a Hamas member. And then the AI would calculate if we shoot a rocket at the guy now, how many civilians would be hit. And then it will maybe say, I mean, depending how high the rank of the guy is in Hamas, like if he has a lower rank, then it's okay to kill 20 civilians to kill him. And if he has a higher rank, it might be okay to kill up to 200 civilians. Then the AI at the end will say maybe there's an 80% chance that this guy there is Hamas member of a middle rank, and if we shoot a rocket at him now, we will kill 175 people, which is acceptable. Should we shoot the rocket or not? And then, okay, there is still a human that has to press a button to say yes or no, but he has 20 seconds for that, and then he just presses yes, and then he immediately gets the next question: should we shoot a rocket there, yes or no, so and so many civilians may die, and has 20 seconds again. And this is what warfare is gonna be from now on, right? This is not gonna stay in Israel. I mean, the Palestinians are the guinea pigs, but Israel is like the ninth or tenth biggest exporter of weapons. Um, I mean, Israel is even proud of being a high tech nation, a startup nation. But of course, what they don't tell you is that a lot of that high tech is technology for war or for control of people. And they are selling it to others and even advertising it as battle tested, promoting it as being tested and being effective against the Palestinians. Right, all of this, someone like Anthony Löwenstein in his Palestine laboratory has worked on, and this is the way wars are fought now. And this is the reason, of course, why they are so terrible, why so many civilians are dying. And between that, this war of the 20th and 21st century, and the wars of the 17th century and prior, um, in the 18th and 19th century, you have a brief time where wars are largely professional armies meeting each other in the open field without the civilian population being affected too much. I mean, even to the point where famously in the American Civil War, you have people picnicking on a nearby hill to watch the battle going on. Not to trivialize those wars or not to say that in those times no civilians were hurt, even in the Western world. And of course, I'm just talking about that, right? The colonial wars were fought much more brutally in a much more barbaric way. But still, it was a time where, compared to what came before and what would come after, wars were relatively harmless, and still, even in that time, Kant calls them the greatest evil. And to him, the right, and I'm dealing here for a time already with his philosophy of right, the right, or in particular the public right, as he calls it, has one job, which is to establish eternal peace. That is the whole question for the philosophy of right. How can we end wars? How can we create a lasting peace? And the first problem we are faced with when asking this question is what even is peace? And that seems a question for which the answer is obvious and easy to give. But no, it turns out that many people never really reflect about what peace means and have a very shallow understanding of peace. Because many people will think, well, peace is when there's no fighting going on. Or at the most, peace is when everyone is friends with each other, everyone likes each other and is holding hands. But Kant would say this is not peace, this is simply ceasefire. This is the absence of fighting, of active war. But as long as, at least potentially, a war could break out always, there is no peace, no true peace. Here you can go back to my previous lectures on the philosophy of right, particularly the lecture, Why Do We Need a State? There I explained that Kant starts from this philosophical concept of the state of nature. So a state of lawlessness, a state where everyone can do essentially whatever they want, and therefore it's just the rule of the strong. And this state of nature is a state of perpetual, at least potential war, because it is a state in which the mine and yours is not secured. And that to Kant is what the right is always about the mine and yours, so about property. And in the state of nature, I can claim something as mine, but somebody else can claim the same thing as his. And since there is no law clarifying to whom it rightfully belongs, since there is no neutral judge to whom we could turn, the only way to determine to whom it should belong is through war, is through fighting. And of course, here the winner will be the stronger one, not the one who is in the right. And this state of nature between individuals can only be ended by establishing a state. Can only be ended through stateswide. That is to create perpetual peace between the individuals. Because to Kant, the basic principle of the public right is the old suum quicque tribur, give to each his own, which he understands as give to each a guarantee of his own. So we need to establish laws that are above us, that guarantee that what is mine, that my property is protected, that no one else is allowed to take my property. And in this situation, now there is peace, because now the laws tell others to leave my property alone and threaten them with punishment if they don't leave it alone. And now there's an executive force, a police force that enforces those laws. So now there is peace between the individuals. And what is true on the level of individuals is also true on the level of states to Kant. So the states can be looked at like individuals that are, once again, even if within each state there is a rule of law and there is peace between the individuals, then the states as such are once again in the state of nature with one another. So between the states, there's once again a lawless anarchy, where the mine and yours is not secured, where two states can claim the same thing, like the same territory, the same resources as theirs, and can only really resolve this through war. And the winner will only be the one who is stronger, not the one who is right. And that's why the state of nature is, by necessity, a state of injustice, a state of war. Kant stresses that it is not necessary even for people to be evil, right? It is enough for people to have a different understanding of what is right and what is wrong, what is theirs and what is yours. I mean, sure, if in the state of nature I say this piece of land is mine and I put a fence around it, someone can just ignore it, can break the fence and get into my garden and take from my trees whatever he wants. He can be a thief. But also, it could be that my apple tree grows over the fence, and now a branch hanging over the fence drops an apple into the neighbor's garden, and I think it's mine because it comes from my tree, but he genuinely thinks no, it should be rightfully his because it's on his land, right? Or it could be that something belongs to me and my neighbor respects it, But then I die, and my child claims all my property as his, saying, well, I inherit it, while the neighbor says, no, it's now free for the taking. And the neighbor may insist, no, I'm not a thief. I didn't take it as long as the owner was alive. But I believe that once the owner dies, it becomes the property becomes ownerless, and the first person to grab it can take it. I don't believe that it should automatically go to the child. And here it's not necessarily that one of the two parties is evil, is a thief. It's just that you have different opinions about what is right. And since you have no laws in the state of nature, like a law could determine, does the apple belong to the owner of the tree or to the owner of the garden where it is, or can you inherit from your parents or can you not? But since there's no law, they need to fight it out. The same is true between states. Sure, a state could just invade, could just grab territory, could just be imperialist. But there could also be genuine conflicts where, let's say, two states border the same sea, and right between them there's an island in the middle, and both claim it as rightfully belonging to them. The issue with the state of nature is, as I said, even if there is no fighting currently, fighting can always break out. So you cannot say that simply because no war is actively being fought right now, you have peace. I mean, I ask you, was there peace between Ukraine and Muscovy before the full-on invasion? I mean, clearly not, or else the invasion could not have happened. There might not have been outright fighting previously, but there certainly wasn't peace, which is precisely why it is so naive when people now are saying, oh, Ukraine should just give up its eastern territories. I mean, like here in Germany, there are lots of people that are both evil and stupid and want to basically abandon Ukraine, which is clearly evil because the Ukrainians are the ones attacked. They are the good guys. Muscovy, they are clearly the bad guys. But it's also dumb because if we don't defend Ukraine, our allies or we could be next, right? But the point is, they claim that they stand for peace, like they have peace marches, peace demonstrations. But essentially, what they want is at best a ceasefire, right? And sure, maybe Moscow would stop firing for now if they were guaranteed to get Crimea and the other eastern territories of Ukraine. But where would the guarantee be that they don't attack again in 5 years or in 10 years? I mean, they did it once already, or rather twice, right? First Crimea and then the rest. So what's gonna stop them from just doing it again? This is precisely why I say so many people are naive. So many people have a superficial understanding of peace. They say, oh, we are against war, so let's stop the fighting. But stopping the fighting is not necessarily establishing peace. If someone goes and tries to beat you up and you stop fighting back and just agree to give him your money so that he leaves you alone, you have no guarantee that he doesn't come back next week to beat you up for your money again. You only have peace when there's a guarantee, which means when there's established right, when there's the rule of law, not anarchy. The same is true, you could say, between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I mean, you cannot claim that on October the 6th there was peace. I mean, all those people who act like Hamas started it all, they seem to claim that. But I mean, at the very best, I mean, we know that not even that is true, but at the very best, there would have been a ceasefire at October the 6th, but certainly not peace. Both people live in a state of nature with one another. There is no laws between them. They can do to each other whatever they want. Both sides have no guarantee. They are not guaranteed the mine and yours, right? I mean, there's no guarantee for the Palestinians that at least the West Bank and Gaza is theirs and Israel will live it alone. There will be no settlements, but rather Israel can do there whatever it wants, can settle it however it likes. And likewise, of course, Israel has no guarantee of security, which is precisely what October the 7th showed. Palestinian armed groups can attack whenever they like. And in such a state of nature, there is no right, there's just rule of the strong, which of course right now is Israel because they have the US at their back. And this is the reason why Kant would say, if we want more than just temporary ceasefires, because those will never lead to peace, to world peace, right? I mean, even if it somehow happened that all fighting on Earth was stopped for some time, that there was some period where no two countries were fighting each other, which is unlikely to happen, but of course it's not strictly impossible according to the laws of nature or whatever, so it could happen, right? In theory it could happen even for a long time. There could be 100 years without anyone fighting, but as long as there's still international anarchy, fighting could technically break out again at any point, so we would never be secure, we would never have peace. True peace to Kant means the rule of law, means laws that guarantee the mine and yours, laws that clear up what belongs to whom, so they prevent conflicts, or if there are conflicts, then they can be resolved through courts, and it means that those laws are enforced. So peace means that people are forced into peace, right? The right as a whole to Kant is about force. I already gave a lecture about the distinction between ethics and right, and there I said, to Kant, ethics is about the goodwill. So I'm an ethically good person if I do act rightfully because I want to. If I, let's say, don't kill someone because I actually have reverence for his humanity, because I actually don't want to kill him. But the right or the law is about force. It is not about the inner goodwill. It is about only the outer actions, and those actions can be enforced, right? So the state with its laws doesn't care if I don't kill my neighbor because I have reverence for his humanity, because I'm a good person, or if I don't kill my neighbor even though I maybe hate him and would like to see him dead, simply because I don't want to go to prison. There's still peace between me and my neighbor in the latter case, because the peace is enforced. I'm forced to act good, even if inwardly I'm not good. And I already said it in previous lectures that according to Kant, a proper state functions not only if it is a state of angels, that should not be the requirement, because angels would not even need a state. A proper state would function even if it was a state of devils, so long as they are at least smart devils that at least care about their own well-being, because then through proper laws they can be forced to behave. And the same is true on the level of what Kant calls the right of nations, so international law. In order for there to be world peace, we don't need nations of angels. It needs We need an international system, an international law that would work even if we had a bunch of nations of devils. We need to force them to live in peace with one another, whether they want to or not. So the whole question for Kant is, how can peace be enforced? How can an international right, a right of nations, be established and enforced? And, well, just like the state of nature between individuals is ended by a state, so a law established above those individuals, we also need to end this global anarchy, this state of nature between states, by establishing a higher law above them. And this, Kant says, could work in two ways. The first option would be what he calls a state of nations. So one global state, one world government, the universal monarchy, as it was called, or maybe the world republic, if you prefer, making the whole world one state. That would establish one law and therefore global peace, hopefully. But Kant says this is not very likely to happen. This would be very hard to achieve, uniting all of humankind in one global state. Because he says, well, people have different, they come from different nations, and they have different languages, and they also have different faith, and this naturally keeps them apart. This naturally prevents them from uniting. And Kant thinks that this is all actually a good thing. Indeed, he thinks everything that is natural is a good thing. That is something I will come back to and explain further when I get to what Kant says about natural science. Then I will give a lecture about teleology and how Kant believes that everything in nature has telos, as the ancient Greeks called it, so an end, a purpose. So everything in nature is good for something. There is nothing that is not purposive in nature. And for that reason, if nature made it so that we are different in language, that there are different faith communities, and that these differences prevent us from uniting, then this is probably purposive. Which reminds me of how the Quran, for example, says that if God had wanted to, he could have made us all one community, but he created people differently, with different skin colors, with different languages, even with different faith, right? In the Quran, this is not treated as something bad. It doesn't say, oh, everyone should be a Mohammedan. But rather this is treated as something good, as something that has a purpose. And Kant says it is good that we are different and that these differences make us uniting into one global state less likely. Because he thinks that this is not just unlikely to happen, it would also be a bad or at least a dangerous thing. Because if we had only one global government, to Kant, it would be very likely that this would turn despotic, that this would not be a republican, a free government, but rather that there would be one global despotism, one global universal monarchy. And then that in turn would be likely to lead to people rebelling against that government, breaking off from that government, and this whole global state breaking apart again. And this would be likely to lead to a new global anarchy. Because, of course, one single global government would also have a very hard time controlling everything and keeping everything together, right? Even more so in Kant's days with the technology of the time. I mean, maybe nowadays when we can travel basically in a day everywhere on the globe, and when communication with every point of the globe can happen in seconds, maybe it would be easier even to control the whole world. But of course, with pre-modern technology, it was pretty much unthinkable. Um, what Kant says here, I mean, he probably had several historical examples that seem to prove his point, right? So several, of course, not global, but very big states or empires um, that were despotic and that then broke apart, like the empire, the conquests of Alexander the Great that broke apart as soon as he died. Um, or also Rome, which as it grew larger, as it conquered its empire, uh, turned more despotic, um, right? Turned into a proper empire with an emperor. Um, and then this large despotic state again broke apart, right? You have the Eastern and the Western Roman Empire, and of course, you don't just have these two halves. Of course, there were times when Rome broke into four parts, or even more when there were civil wars, several guys claiming the title of emperor. Um, and indeed, this opinion of Kant's was not just his own opinion, but rather it was basically the common opinion of his time in the 18th century, very much based on the Roman history, on the Roman experience, that if a state grew to a certain size, it could no longer be a republic. Republicanism was thought to maybe be possible for a city state or whatever, but not for an empire. So after a certain size, it would turn despotic, and then after a certain size, it would probably break apart. That was the common opinion. Um, which is also something that people talked about or feared about the newly founded United States at first, right? For us nowadays, it is sometimes hard to appreciate how revolutionary it was that the founding fathers chose to at least attempt to have a republic and not a monarchy, because all the common wisdom of the time would have said that this would not work. That and especially with the newly founded United States growing and expanding and becoming ever larger, it would end up like Rome. It would turn into despotism and probably break apart. But anyways, so Kant says that one state of nations, one universal monarchy, is neither very likely to be achievable, um, nor is it to be preferred. So that leaves us only with one other option. If we do want to establish some sort of global law, some sort of, as is now said, rules-based world order, or we should rather say laws-based world order. And that is what Kant calls a federation of nations. This would bring only negative unity, while the world state would bring a positive unity between nations. And this is an idea that Kant wasn't the first to propose. He himself has read about it already in Rousseau and Saint-Pierre, and mentions them also. But it is a favorite idea of his. Especially in his later years. He kept always coming back to it, always talking about it, always defending it against the accusation of being only chimerical, so of being only an unrealistic dream that could not be walked about. No, he says this is what we need, this is what should be established. A proper federation of nations. So several states should form this federation with one another, and this would not mean them uniting into one state with one government. Rather, they would retain their sovereignty. So they would stay autonomous. They would still inwardly make their own laws. And even outwardly, they would still have their own foreign politics, their own foreign relations, their own trade, and so on. But this federation of nations would be a federation of peace, and it would serve basically two purposes. It would protect the members from one another, so create peace between them, and it would protect them from others, from third parties. So as for protecting them from one another, Kant says within this federation, there would have to be certain laws, certain rules of conduct, and there would have to be clarity about the mine and yours, like which borders should be established, which territory belongs to whom, which resources belong to whom. And if a conflict between members of the federation arise, there should be some sort of institution to clear up that conflict. So there should be some world court, like we do have now with the International Court of Justice, which just like a civil court within a nation, when, let's say, you have a conflict with your neighbor, two states that had a conflict with one another could turn to. And I mean, many people are not aware that this is indeed largely what the International Court of Justice does, right? I mean, it's usually not so prominently in the news. It just got in the news because now of South Africa's case of genocide against Israel. But I mean, it's not constantly judging genocides. There can be simple conflicts between nations, like border disputes or whatever, and they can turn to that court, and it can try to resolve those conflicts peacefully. And it does actually work in certain situations. Or Kant says there could be what he calls the Wien Senate of Nations. So some sort of council of the member states, like we have with the UN, with the General Assembly, or with the Security Council, that once again two members in conflict with one another could turn to. And such a world court or such a Senate of Nations would then deliberate, would then judge and decide about the mine and yours. And all the members of this federation would have to accept it. And if not, right, because within the state you have the three powers, right? You have laws, you have the legislative power, you have courts, you have the judiciary, but you also have a police force, you have an executive power. Well, when it comes to this federation, you could have laws for the federation. You could also have this world court or this Senate of Nations as a judiciary power. But since you don't have an actual world state, an actual world government, you would lack the executive power, right? There would be no world police or world army. But to Kant, that's not necessarily needed, as long as the member states themselves, with their respective armies, would execute the laws or would execute the decisions of the World Court. So let's say the federation has 10 members, and 2 members have a conflict, turn to court, and then one of those 2 doesn't like the court's decision and declares war on the other. Then the other 8 members of the federation would have to declare war on this now woke state, would have to help the 9th member that is being attacked. And Kant says, well, since they would be in the majority, they would almost certainly very easily win, right? If it was 9 states fighting a war against one other state, that other state would probably have no chance, which is precisely knowing this, while this other state probably would not even go that far, would not even risk this war, but rather would, even if begrudgingly, respect the decision of the court. And again, that's what it is all about, right? Peace should not require everyone being angels, but rather peace should even be possible if everyone is a devil, because of self-interest, because we force them to be peaceful with one another. And if a state knew, well, if I don't submit to international law and to the International Court of Justice's decisions, then everyone declares war on me, then they probably would submit. And the other possibility is, of course, that there's a conflict not between 2 members of the federation, but between a member and a non-member. And in this case, the federation would serve as a defensive pact. So that's important. It's not meant as an offensive pact. So if, let's say, a member declares war on a non-member, attacks a non-member, that state should be on its own. The other members of the federation should not help it. But if one member of the federation is attacked by a non-member, then the others, in our example with 10 members, that would mean the other 9 members, should now come to aid. And again, in this case, we would now have 10 states fighting against one 11th state. So the war would probably be over very swiftly. And knowing this, the 11th state would probably not attack in the first place, because it would know that it is not just attacking one other state, it is attacking a whole federation of states who would all help one another. Indeed, this would probably drive this other state to want to join the federation, right? Because let's say there is maybe a 12th state that threatens it with war. And again, this 11th state, maybe it's a state of devils. Maybe it would like to attack the 10th state, but it knows that it has no chance to win against the whole federation. It knows that it is itself threatened from another non-member, so it will probably think, well, better to join the federation. I will have to give up on ever conquering this 10th state here, this neighbor of mine. But at least I will be safe from this other neighbor, from this 12th state. And then, of course, this 12th state might also want to join to be safe from yet another state threatening it. So, I mean, the larger this federation grows, the more secure it is, right? If just two states formed the federation, agreeing to not attack one another and to also aid one another if one of them was attacked by a third party, well, maybe a federation of two states could still be defeated by one other state if that state was larger and stronger. But a federation of 10 states would be less likely to be defeated. And so the more this federation grows, the more secure do its members become. So outside the federation, there would still be lawless anarchy, but within there would be, so to say, a realm of peace, a realm of law, and that would make it ever more attractive for further states to join, which again would make it more secure, more powerful, and therefore even more attractive for even more members to join, which hopefully would lead to eventually more or less the whole world joining this federation and therefore ending up at peace. But the states that are in the federation would not necessarily have to even wait for others to join. They could even force others to join. Here you can go back once again to my lecture on why we even need a state, where I said that according to Kant, if I live in the state of nature, it is a condition of perpetual, at least potential war. It is a condition where I'm always threatened by my neighbor, because I have no guarantee that what is mine will remain mine, that he will respect it. And so therefore, Kant says, I can demand of my neighbor to give me such a guarantee. I can demand of him to join with me under the same law, where he guarantees me my property and I guarantee him his property. And if he refuses, then even if he does not outright attack me, I can take this refusal as an attack already. And therefore, I'm very much within my rights to now attack him preemptively. This would not be an offensive war, this would be a preemptive defensive war. And I have every right to either drive this neighbor away or to force him, if he wants to keep living next to me, to live under law with me, right? I mean, let's say a bunch of people, 10 people are stranded on a lone island and they agree to establish a law that says, okay, this stuff here, this part of the island with all the things there belong to me, no one else touch it, this belongs to you, I won't touch it. And imagine 9 people agreed and there was one person saying, No, I don't want to agree. Um, I will not say that this and this and this is your guys' property, and I will not promise that I will not touch it. Um, I mean, this person could now say, "What's your problem? I am not stealing your property. I am not attacking you." Um, but then the others could answer, "Well, what is your problem? If you don't plan to at some point attack us, you might as well promise that you won't do it, right? You might as well submit to our law. It's not like you have anything to lose." If he doesn't agree with that, they can force him. Because again, the right is about force. It's not ethics, it's not about my own goodwill, it is about the good actions I can be forced to do. And this is true also on the level of states. So Kant says if several states have formed this federation, uh, then they can demand from a neighboring state to also join it, to also agree, I will not attack you. I will respect your borders. And if the neighboring state does not agree with that, they can take that as essentially a declaration of war. Um, and they can fight a war against that state to force it into the federation. So, in that way, whether through war or whether voluntarily, because it is attractive to join, this federation could quickly grow to encompass more or less the whole world and therefore create peace. And as a side note to Kant, this is also let's say that the normal way things progress. It's not just this way between states. To him, this is analogous, for example, to the history of the sciences. He says that amongst the ancient Greeks, different sciences like mathematics, medicine, like philosophy, developed more or less independently of one another and were more or less in the state of nature with one another. So they could infringe on each other's territory, like the philosopher could try to think about matters of mathematics. And then for a time, Kant says there is a war of all against all between the sciences, where every science tries to come out on top. So he says different sciences like theology, like morality, like logics, have all claimed to be the highest science and try to dominate the whole. And this we can say is of course still going on, right? Like you will have people claiming that physics is the highest science, that everything is basically just applied physics, or that physics itself is just applied mathematics. You had people that, like Kant, for example, the 19th century, that want to boil everything down to to sociology, or that want to base everything on psychology, for example, or people that want to make it all about economics. Um, but eventually, Kant says the sciences will be united in a federation that is the university, with its different faculties, its different subjects, so where the borders are cleared, and each science will focus on its own subject. And then this will benefit all of them, because now they can actually work together. Now they can actually profit from each other's insights, instead of infringing on one another. This Federation of Nations is basically Kant's suggestion for perpetual peace. And for us nowadays, it can maybe be hard to fully grasp just how revolutionary and also how unrealistic it seemed in the day. Because, of course, nowadays we still don't have what Kant proposed. But we do have, and we are used to some sorts of international federations of nations. We have things like the UN, of course. We have things like NATO. We have something like the EU. And to be sure, all of those can be criticized. None of those are perfect. And again, none of those are precisely what Kant had in mind. Um, but there are some sorts of federations. And whatever you rightfully may criticize them for, you would have to admit that at least to some degree, they already work at creating peace. Now, less so the UN as a whole. But if you consider NATO, for example, I mean, we are not used to look at NATO exactly as a peace federation rather than a war federation. But you do have to admit that to this point, there have been no wars between NATO members. Even though they are not necessarily all great friends, right? I mean, consider the Greeks and the Turks. Um, there might be aggressive rhetorics between them, and there might be disputes and arming. But still, as long as NATO functions, um, it is not likely that they would outright be at war with one another. Even more so, the EU. Whatever else you want to say about it, um, it does it does create peace between its members. It does create peace within Europe. And here too, again, it's not about everyone being angels, but even the devils are forced into peace, right? I mean, consider the Nazi regime of Orban in Hungary. They are revisionists. They are still complaining about territories lost over 100 years ago in the First World War, like territories that may now belong to Romania, for example. Um, but it is simply unthinkable as long as Europe doesn't break apart, as long as we do have the EU, that tiny Hungary would start a war over this. And if it did, surely the other European nations would end that war very quickly. The same is true for other far right forces in Europe, right? I mean, you have Meloni in Italy, but even though she has been characterized as a post fascist, and even though she may be causing damage within Italy itself, um, there's no way that Italy, like it did under Mussolini, under the original fascists, would soon start wars to conquer, let's say, the Balkans. Um, and likewise, we can be assured that if the Front National rises to power in France, or if the AfD rises to power in Germany, as bad as that would be, as long as the European Union is not destroyed, it is not very likely that they would suddenly start a war against their neighbors. So we can see how such a federation can create some sort of peace, at least within it. And I mean, um, just look at the Ukrainians; they are very much aware of that, right? That is precisely why they would like to join the EU or the NATO, because they know this is what can keep them safe from Moscow. Not being on their own, but being part of some sort of federation that secures the peace. But in Kant's day, we did not yet have such federations necessarily, and therefore, many would claim that such an idea, such a federation of nations, is completely chimerical, is completely unrealistic. But here I will say, and I talked about this in greater detail in previous lectures, like the one on moral versus pragmatic politics, that those realists, looking down on the idealists like Kant or Rousseau or Saint-Pierre, tend to be very unrealistic. Their realism is always based on experience, but experience can only tell us what was so far. It cannot tell us what could be or what will be. And so, I mean, the whole progress of right, of justice, is full of realists saying, no, this can't be done. You cannot possibly give the women the right to vote. You cannot possibly free the slaves. You cannot possibly abolish the monarchy and have a democracy. And I mean, when have these realists ever been right? They are always wrong. All they do is keeping us back, is preventing progress from going faster. But in the end, what one age fought over and what many people argued was not possible is not just done. It becomes so commonplace and so much a given that no one even questions how it could ever have been doubted. And the same surely would be true with such a federation of peace. People nowadays might claim that it's not possible, that it's not doable, but we just need to do it. And then we would probably look back and wonder how people could ever have doubted it. Of course, even in Kant's days, people could see some examples of supranational federations that did work at least to some degree. I mean, consider the United States. Nowadays, of course, we are used to view them as just one state, but we should not forget that originally they were 13 different states, 13 colonies that were not so united. I mean, they were united in wanting to get rid of the British, wanting to be independent. But apart from that, there was maybe a possibility for them to become independent nations. And their union was first off a rather loose federation that did, however, to manage to keep the peace between them. Likewise, an example that I don't think Kant was aware of, but nevertheless that existed, there was, of course, the Confederacy of the Iroquois, right? They had formed a confederacy between, at first, 5 tribes. They did retain some sort of autonomy, each of them, but still they had a sort of central council, you could say, where they came together. And while in the past they may have fought one another, with the establishment of that confederacy, they didn't anymore. They still fought others outside of that confederacy, very much so. But at least between them, this confederacy did manage to create you could say, perpetual peace, because it lasted quite long. I mean, no one can say exactly how long, because we only know the end of the confederacy, when it was destroyed through the European colonialism. But we cannot say exactly when it started, but it probably lasted for hundreds of years, and did manage to keep the peace between its members. and it did at least somewhat influence the Americans and how they built their own institutions. But as for Kant himself, he is thinking mainly of the example of the Netherlands and of Switzerland. Again, we are nowadays used to view both of them as single states, not as federations of states. But that is at least how they started out, right? There's a reason we say the Netherlands in plural, because there are many Netherlands, right? Holland as the whole is sometimes called as just one of them. And the same is true for Switzerland with its various cantons. It started out as essentially one of these late medieval confederacies of cities, of which there were many, but others ended up being swallowed up by principalities, while this one ended up becoming its own independent state. And it did create internal peace. I mean, in the past, there were wars within Switzerland, just like 500 years ago during the time of the Reformation. Various cities in Switzerland, like Bern and Zurich and so on, they still went to war with one another. But eventually, their union, their confederacy, ended their war. What Kant also has in mind is the Holy Roman Empire of his day. So Germany at the time did, of course, not exist yet as a nation state. Rather, there were like 300 different city-states, principalities, and so on, that were usually united in this Holy Roman Empire. And not only did they have an emperor, they did in Kant's day have the institution of the permanent Reichstag in the city of Regensburg. So a sort of senate or parliament where representatives of all the members were sent, and that was meant to resolve disputes between the parts of the empire. Now, of course, that in many cases did not work. It did not prevent internal wars. I mean, Kant himself lived through the time of the 7 Years' War and so on. Kant himself saw his own state of Prussia be at war with Austria. But still, Kant had some hope that with time, with further reform, this could be improved. The permanent Reichstag in Regensburg could gain more authority, its decisions could be enforced better, and eventually this could create peace first within the Holy Roman Empire, and then maybe this federation could spread, others could join it. So Kant was hopeful, at least for a time, that the Germans could be the people to start this peace federation, this federation of nations, and that from there it could then expand to also include others, to also include non-Germans. He is also hopeful for that, first because their constitution, their institutions at the time already somewhat had this form of a federation, even though one that didn't quite work yet. But also because of the natural character of the Germans, which Kant says are people that is not so stuck to its ways, and not so persistent in them, but rather a people open to new things, and a people very accepting of reforms. Like in religious matters, the Reformation had shown, which did happen in Germany after all, right? So as a German in the 21st century, I have to say, unfortunately, if that was the German national character, not much of it seems to remain, because ever since the end of World War II, the Germans have become a very conservative people. And if you look at our politics nowadays, Germans absolutely refuse to accept even the slightest changes, and would rather go down, would rather self-destroy than accept even small reforms or attempt even the smallest experiments. They will always vote for the conservative option. They will always vote for the status quo. So not much seems to remain of that which Kant once saw in the Germans and once praised in the Germans. And indeed, if we look at the German history, we of course see that Kant's wishes or hopes did not come true. So the Germans, the Holy Roman Empire, of course, broke apart under pressure from Napoleon, like 2 years after Kant's death. After that, after the defeat of Napoleon, there was the Deutsche Bund, so the German Federation that was formed, followed by the Northern German Federation. That maybe still was some sort of federation, that maybe still had some potential to turn into a proper peace federation as Kant had envisioned. But then in 1871, it united into one singular nation state, right? So the Germans essentially refused to listen to their philosophers. Not just Kant, also those that came after him, like Fichte, like Nietzsche. Fichte also saw it as the strength of the Germans, as the potential of the Germans, that they did not, like the French, let's say, have a centralized singular nation state, but that they were used to some sort of federalism. And Fichte wanted the Germans to unite in spirit, to unite in culture, but not necessarily have one central government. You could even see a potential in several states competing with one another, not competing in war, but competing in culture and science, each striving to be the most aufklärt, the most learned one. Of course, that was not listened to. And then Nietzsche was basically the last of those German philosophers that still had hope for the Germans going their own way, using their potential. Nietzsche too, the young Nietzsche, before 1871, wanted the Germans to unite as a culture, to form one common culture, like the ancient Greeks that were so important to Nietzsche had been united in culture, had been united, for example, in the Olympic Games and in the cult of Delphi, while still having their different city-states. And Nietzsche was of the opinion that those ancient Greeks would have done better to create a proper federation of those city-states, rather than eventually being conquered and swallowed up by the Macedonian kingdom, and have one central nation state, more or less. This is what he also wanted for Germany, a true German culture. But those hopes were disappointed. The Germans instead chose in 1871 the Reich, the empire. They chose a nation state like others. They wanted to be like the French, like the British, to compete with them, and then to very much be like the others, right? They said we also deserve a place at the sun. That was a common slogan then. They said we also need an empire. We also need colonies in Africa. So instead of using our potential, instead of going our own way, and thereby maybe creating something that others could then join or copy, that others could learn from, instead we copy the others. Instead we try to be like everyone else, and we all know how that ended up. This empire, this aspiration for colonialism and imperialism, it led to 2 world wars. It led to the rise of the Nazis, and so Germany failed in its mission. And I mean, since then, since after the Nazis, and this also means since before the Nazis, since 1871, what has Germany done for the world, right? What use has there been in there being a Germany since those times? So of course you can say maybe that in a way the Germans still, without meaning to, did fulfill what Kant believed to be their historic mission or their fate, that is leading to the creation of a federation of nations, because while they themselves did not create it, while their union, their federation did not turn into such a federation, but rather they turned it into just another nation state, their actions at least led others to believe that such a federation was needed, right? After the First World War, the League of Nations, as a sort of predecessor to the UN, was formed. And then after the Second World War, the UN was formed. Both, you could say, not by the Germans, not through the Germans, but in a way because of the Germans. And maybe this can teach us the lesson that if there is such a thing as a fate that a nation has, or maybe that also a singular person could have, if there is such a thing as your destiny, your mission, then maybe you cannot really choose to fulfill or not to fulfill it, but rather your choice is maybe just between fulfilling it properly by embracing it, by really doing what you should be doing, or by trying to run from it, still in a way fulfilling it, but in a way that is much more bloody and much more full of unnecessary sacrifices. Because, yeah, the Germans did betray what all the philosophers said was their nature, was their calling, in a way that still led to more or less the envisioned result when it comes to this federation. But what was the price? And this gives me an opportunity to add another thought that might not have directly to do with the question of perpetual peace, but that I can add here. And it is some are different. Some people are different. This can be because of outside reasons. Maybe they come from a different country. Maybe they have a different sexuality. Maybe they are autistic or something. This, of course, can also be for more inner reasons. Maybe they are different in their character, in their outlook, in their thinking. And likewise, some nations, some peoples are different, like the Germans, like the Greeks, like the Jews. And this difference could be an enrichment. The others, the mass, the normal ones, they could profit from such a difference. They could profit from a different perspective, from different ideas. Indeed, this is what makes pluralism possible. And pluralism, I will talk about this when I get to Kant's concept of Aufklärung, so of enlightenment. Pluralism is what drives Aufklärung. If everyone is the same, every conversation is just like talking to yourself. You will learn nothing new. You can learn through talking to others that are actually different. But now the problem is that since the age of Aufklärung, we have this idea of equality. And of course, equality as such is a good thing, is something that ought to be. But the problem is we did not have true Aufklärung. People did not truly get aufklärt. That is, they did not truly learn to think for themselves and to lead themselves through reason. But rather, for a large part, all that happened is they took up certain ideas, or maybe just certain buzzwords from the aufklärt thinkers, without really understanding them on a deeper level. I mean, this is of course not exclusive to Aufklärung. This is what always happens, right? Just like how Christianization or Islamization did not lead to people truly understanding and truly living the teachings of Jesus or of Muhammad, but just adopting some buzzwords of one God or whatever. And the same happened to Aufklärung. And so people did take up the concept of equality, this idea that everyone should be equal. And this is something that now almost every person, whether we are aware of it or not, has in mind. Almost everyone believes that people should be equal. Even those who seemingly don't believe in equality, like the right-wingers or whatever, the racists. I will get to that in a second, how racism is not contrary to equality, but is actually a product of people thinking there should be equality. But the problem is that they misunderstood what equality in the sense of Aufklärung means. As I explained in previous lectures, you can go back to the lecture on the apperception, the self-consciousness. To Kant, there is the human being as a central being, as he appears in the world as an individual, the homo phenomenon. And this human being is not equal with other human beings. Some appear as male, some appear as female, some appear as white, some appear as black, some appear as straight, some appear as gay. There's no equality here. We are all different. But then to Kant, there's also the homo noumenon, not the individual human being, but humanity as such, us being rational beings as such. And this is where our dignity comes from, our rationality, our autonomy, our freedom. And it is this humanity that we all share which should be revered. The essential human being as such does not have more worth or more dignity than any other essential being, than any animal, but it should be revered, it should be treated with reverence for the humanity inside of it. And that is precisely what the unaufklärt people don't understand. Because being unaufklärt, they are led by their senses, so they only know the homo phenomenon. The homo noumenon does not appear. It cannot be perceived. It can only be sought. And if you cannot think for yourself, then you cannot think this idea. You will be under the spell of what your senses show you, and your senses show you, of course, people that are different in various ways. And so if in spite of that, you still got this idea in your head now that people should be equal, you will necessarily misunderstand it. The equality Aufklärung was talking about was an inner equality. We are equal in dignity. We are equal in worth. Therefore, we should have equal rights in spite of our outer differences. They don't matter because they don't have anything to do with our humanity. A woman is not less human than a man. A black person is not less human than a white person. And only that humanity is what matters. Well, many people took up this equality, but and that everyone should be equal, but they make the mistake of only looking at the sensual, at the homo phenomenon. And this, in the 200 years or 250 years or so since the age of Aufklärung, has, I think, led to two issues. On the one side, those people who are, let's say, normal, who are not different, said, okay, everyone should be equal. Therefore, if someone is not equal on the outside, if someone is outwardly different from us, that's a problem. And that person should either be forced to become equal, or if that's not possible, or if that person refuses, then that person must go, because there's only place for equality. And this is, of course, fascism. This is what fascism is about, what the Nazis called Gleichschaltung, synchronization or coordination, making everyone the same, right? So when I say fascism here, I mean it in the broadest possible sense. I don't necessarily mean Nazism. I don't necessarily mean being far right. I just mean this attitude that everyone has to be the same, everyone has to be coordinated or eradicated. What the precise goal is, so what is this sameness that everyone should have, that can differ between various fascisms. So in this sense, the communists were just as fascist as the Nazis. Various fundamentalist groups are just as fascist as the Nazis. I mean, to the Nazis, sure, everyone should be white and blonde and blue-eyed and an Aryan. To some fundamentalists, everyone should be a believer, right? If you ask the Taliban or some evangelical fundamentalists or the Kahanists in Israel, Everyone should be a believer of their faith. Everyone should belong to their group. There is no room for the others, for the disbelievers, or so on. But the shared trait of all these fascisms is that they want everyone to be outwardly equal, and they reject those who aren't. They reject those who are different. This is one side. But this is not what I actually want to talk about here, because I think the other side of that same coin is that in these modern times, since the age of Aufklärung, also those who are different have taken up this thought that there's something wrong with being different. They too, if they didn't understand that equality is about our humanity, not about what's on the outside, they too think that there's something wrong with them when they are not equal. So they too think they should be like everyone else, and so therefore, instead of embracing their difference, instead of celebrating it, instead of standing by it, instead of actually living it and maybe even deepening it and understanding that maybe they have a place, maybe they even have a mission with this difference, maybe others could profit and be enriched from their difference, many of those who were different, be it individuals, be it nations, have rejected their difference and have tried and are still trying to be like everyone else. This is precisely what led to the national delusion of the Germans. The Germans did not, like their great thinkers like Kant or Fichte or Nietzsche did, see their state being splintered into various groups, living in a very loose federation. This pluralism between them, which is what made Aufklärung possible in the first place. I mean, right? There's a reason why Aufklärung happened in Germany and not somewhere else. And no, this is one of the reasons why I don't use the English translation, because when you use the word enlightenment, you gloss over this fact. You then think that it also happened in France or in England, but what happened there, and I'm not the first to notice, Michel Foucault, for example, has also said that what happened there was very different from the specific Aufklärung in Germany. Instead of seeing this as a strength, the Germans ended up being ashamed of it, feeling like they were lesser than others with their nation states, and insisted, like I already said, we too need a nation state, we need an empire, we need colonies. And therefore, I would say that the nationalists in the 19th century, especially the latter half of the 19th century, and then into the 20th century and all the way to the Nazis, far from being patriots, far from loving Germanness as such, and celebrating Germanness and the unique character of the Germans and what it maybe had to bring to the table to the other nations, they were not patriots. They were traitors. They rejected their fatherland. They rejected what it truly meant to be German and what all the great German thinkers had considered to be German, and to them it was not good enough. They did not want to be German. They essentially wanted to turn Germany into France or into Great Britain. I mean, right? The Kaiser, the German emperor, he wanted to have a fleet like the British. Why? The British already had a fleet. Isn't it enough that one nation has a fleet? Do we all need a fleet? I mean, unfortunately, they, to a very large degree, succeeded in eradicating anything that made Germany different or special. And they did turn Germany into just one other European nation state. And I would pose the question, how was that needed? I mean, in 1871, when Germany was formed, there already was more than a dozen nation states in Europe. Who needed one more? Who needed a German nation state? And once again, what has it brought to the world? Apart from war and genocide. I mean, what positive thing, what use since 1871 has there been in there existing a Germany? This whole empire was entirely useless to humanity. It had nothing new to bring because there was already a French empire, there was already a British empire. Who needed another one of those? But of course, this phenomenon, you can, I think, observe it everywhere, not just with the Germans and their nationalism. I mean, you have the same attitude in certain leftist, certain woke circles. They also reject any sort of difference, not realizing how close that makes them to the fascists that they are fighting against. I mean, you will hear those people here in Germany, for example, they often complain that even if you just ask somebody where they come from, like a black person, if you ask them where they come from, this is racist because maybe they come from Germany, maybe they are born here. Yes, maybe they are, but most likely their parents weren't, or at least their grandparents. I mean, this I think is a more German issue because in America, of course, you would not ask a black person where do you come from originally, because here it's much more likely that that person's family has lived in America for generations. But in Germany, that's simply not the case. There are far less black people and they are mostly recent immigrants. So it's not unreasonable to wonder where someone's family came from. But those people, they will say that even this very question, even if it's asked nicely and with genuine curiosity, is already racist. And what this comes down to is you mustn't notice the differences. There cannot be a difference between a white German that has lived here for generations and a black person that has immigrated or whose parents have immigrated here. I would ask, why not? I mean, to me, it's great that it's not all white Germans. I mean, let's be real, most of them suck. I'm not a particular fan of many of my countrymen. I consider it a great enrichment that there are people from Africa or from the Arab world that have moved here in more recent times. But then when we get told that you mustn't even notice this difference, when they try to essentially, those leftists, gloss over that difference, well, how can they be an enrichment then? If they are not allowed to be different, and if we are not allowed to notice this difference, if they are just the same as everyone, well, then I would maybe also turn into a Nazi and say no more immigrants, because we don't need more of the same. We don't need more Germans. That I can tell you. We already have way too many of those. And or likewise, and this is maybe not so much specific only to Germany, those woke leftists, they will complain about heteronormativity, to which my reply would always be, I mean, being heterosexual is the norm. That's simply how it is, and that's probably how it always will be. It simply is the norm. I'm sorry, people. It is not normal to not be straight. And I'm saying that not wanting to make a judgment about value here, right? I'm not saying it is bad to not be straight. I'm using the word normal in a neutral way here. I'm just saying it is not the norm. It is not the standard. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, there's maybe something right with that, with some people being different, being not the standard, maybe challenging those who are normal. Um, but instead of embracing that, um, this ideology of the woke left wants to just gloss over it. I mean, you have that also when they talk about trans people, right? When they um, insist even to comical or absurd degrees in saying that, for example, trans women are women. It's not enough for them to say, okay, accept those people, treat those people with the same regard and reverence as every other human being, let those people be free, let those people live their own lives. No, they will say you have to treat them as women. And not even as men who became women, right? It's not enough to accept that now they are women, but they didn't used to be women. No, to that ideology, even that makes you a bigot because they always were women, right? Um, which is why, for example, they reject the word sex change for a surgery, right? Because they will say, oh, their sex or their gender was not changed. They were women even before the surgery. Now they just have a body that fits with their true identity. Um, or some absurd ideologues go so far as to say that um, even before that surgery, so when someone has a male body, um, a lesbian woman that refuses to sleep with someone with a male body, simply on the grounds of that person identifying as a woman, is a transphobic bigot. Um, which ironically is not very progressive, if you ask me, if you tell lesbians that they must have sex with men. Um, So, what these people are doing, once again, is they don't want differences to be even acknowledged, to even exist. Um, I mean, they will they will always talk about how being trans is not some new fashion, some new trend. There have always been trans people, and I mean, what we can say is that in the past there have probably been people that nowadays would be identified in some way as trans or as queer. Um, of course, they were not identified by others or by themselves as such in the past because those very concepts did not exist. Other concepts might have existed, and those people in some cases did have a place in society. Maybe not so much here in European society, but for example, if you go to India or to Pakistan, they did have certain places, certain roles in society. Even at court, there was a name for them. But with the difference that they had, um, they themselves would never have thought of just saying there is no difference and they are like everyone else. Um, this rejection of difference, of your own difference, um, is a very modern thing. And ironically, once again, these people may not realize it, but they are engaging in more or less the same thing as the fascists are engaging in. I mean, for example, when they complain about heteronormativity, when they are saying you must treat being gay as completely normal, just like being straight, you must not notice any difference. Um, well, that is what the right wingers amongst the gay people want, right? And I don't know if you have those so much wherever you are. I mean, from what I can tell from afar, openly gay right wingers, that's probably not such a thing for example, in the US. But here in Germany, it very much is. In the last years, in the last decades, being gay has been pretty normalized. And now there are some very prominent gay politicians that are in the Conservative Party or even in the Nazi Party. I mean, our Nazi Party, the AfD, is led by an openly lesbian woman. Who even is in a relationship with a foreigner, with a brown woman. That's how progressive our Nazis are. And you can note that these people are often especially right-wing. Not just the ones in the Nazi Party, also the ones in the Conservative Party. The openly gay politicians there, they are often on the right end of the Conservative Party, those that are most open to maybe be in coalition with the Nazi Party. So they are very bourgeois, very trying to be respectable. They want their gayness to be normal. They very much reject anything that might not be normal. So more, let's say, queer expressions of gayness. They don't want anything to do with that. And so it's ironic to me when certain kinds of leftists also insist on making everything normal. I don't want normal. I want differences, and I want us to have a place for those differences. And I want us to understand that those outer differences in the phenomenal world don't matter when inside, in the intelligible world, we all share the same humanity. But again, it seems to me that our modern world has very much misunderstood what everyone should be equal actually meant, and has taken this in a very superficial manner, which on the one hand leads to the normal ones being fascist, rejecting the different ones, but on the other hand, it leads to the different ones rejecting their own difference. I mean, a third and final example I want to give is the Jews, right? Because this is what Zionism is. I mean, Zionism is the attempt to eradicate Jews. It is the attempt to make Jews like everyone else. I mean, there was a strength in the Jews being different, in the Jews being spread all over the world, over all countries, living in diaspora, and living together with other people, right? I mean, the Zionist propaganda now treats this as if it was centuries or even millennia long history of abuse, of oppression, of pogroms, with the Nazi genocide of the Jews as the only possible conclusion. But that's, of course, a gross lie that does a lot of injustice to essentially 2,000 years of very rich Jewish history. I mean, Jews, if you go to Eastern Europe, to Poland, Ukraine, they lived there for like 400 years side by side with Poles, with Ukrainians, with Latvians. And of course, it was not always peaceful, it was not always without conflict. But it was also not always violent. There was a very rich history and culture there. Or the Jews that lived in Spain or in North Africa side by side with Arabs, with Mohammedans. A Moslem Jew even at one point rising to Grand Vizier in Spain. The other points, someone like the philosopher Maimonides rising to the position of court physician of the Sultan Saladin. Also the internal difference, the internal diversity of the Jews, right? Where the Sephardic Jews of Spain and Portugal and Northern Africa, there were the Ashkenazim in Central and Eastern Europe, there were the Mizrahim, the Arab Jews, and a lot of that is forever lost. Israel has destroyed a lot of that diversity, especially that of the Mizrahi Jews, who largely have lost their culture, their individuality, have largely rejected it thanks to Israel's internal racism. And instead of the Jews using their difference as a strength, instead of embracing it as something that can bring something on the table, that can enrich the others, and it has done so in our history very much, right? I mean, I, as a German, for example, who very much lives and breathes the German intellectual tradition, who has grown up with the great German thinkers, one Heinrich Heine, the great German Jewish poet of the 19th century, one Heinrich Heine, to me, is worth so much more than thousands or millions of Zionist Jews combined. I grew up with my dad reading the collected works of Heine to me, and I very much agree with Kurt Tucholsky, another important German Jew whose collected works my dad read to me, who was a journalist in the Weimar Republic, who early on warned before the rise of the Nazis, and he said, if you want to see what's wrong in Germany at the time, in the 20s, just compare the number of war memorials, of soldiers or generals memorials, to the number of Heine memorials we have in Germany. Heinrich Heine has done so much to German culture, to German thinking, and of course beyond Germany also. He could not have done that if he had been in Israel. So instead, what the Zionists want is for the Jews to be like everyone else, right? I mean, just like I asked, how was a German nation state, how was a German empire needed in 1871, when there were already other nation states? Like, if God had never created the German people, what would have been lost if all the German people are is just a copy of the French people or of the British people? Just like that, I ask, why was an Israel needed? Like, what has Israel, since the decades it existed, done for the world? I'm not asking what if Jewish people brought to the world. I mean, that question is very easy to answer. Our world, I mean, cannot even be imagined without the contribution of Jewish people. But what has Israel contributed to the world? And I don't mean new weapon systems, new drones or whatever. I mean culturally, intellectually, morally. How would the world be a worse place if it just had never existed? The simple answer is, I mean, even if they had really found a land without a people, for a people without a land, even if there had been no people, even if Israel had not come with the oppression and ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Palestinians, even if they had managed to found it on some lone island where nobody lived, still I would ask, what use is there to another nation state? To the Jews becoming like any other people, having a state of their own? What a loss to humanity that is. And ironically, of course, the Zionists will now accuse every Jew being critical of Israel as being a self-hating Jew. Um, Ironically, it's the Zionists who are self-hating Jews. I mean, it's them who reject what is specifically Jewish, right? Um, Quite openly so, even. I mean, if you read the early Zionists, like Theodor Herzl, the founder of the modern political Zionism, or Zev Jabotinsky, the founder of revisionist, of right-wing Zionism, um, read their writings. It's full of anti-Semitic cliches of the 19th century. They are basically saying the anti-Semites are right. Jews are everything they claim. Jews are sneaky and weak and obsessed with money and greedy and so on. So yes, Jews are subhumans. Uh, just their solution was not okay, therefore the Jews must be genocided, but rather their solution was okay, the Jews need a nation of their own and they need to change, they need to start doing sports, for example, start becoming warrior like, right? Like one prominent Zionist started talking about the muscle Jew as the new ideal of the Jew. If you read these writings, the way they describe their perfect Zionist Jew of the future, it sounds like Hitler's dream of the master race, of the Aryan. So essentially, those Zionists are saying, yes, the Jews are as pathetic, as despicable, as nasty as the anti Semites say, and therefore they must stop being Jews. They must reject everything that is Jewish about them and turn into how the anti-Semites view Aryans. And this is all part of the same modern movement towards equality, but not towards the true inner equality of rights and dignity, but towards misunderstood outer equality. And as I already said, it seems to me that the German history shows that if you reject what makes you you, if you reject the specific destiny that comes with your individual nature and characteristics, it might still come about in a way, but in a way that will include a lot of pain. But with that said, let us turn back once more to Kant and his vision of eternal freedom through a federation of nations. First, I want to address the fact that nowadays there is, especially after the past 2.5 years of Israel's genocide, there's a lot of disillusionment or cynicism about the very idea of international law, international right, and a federation such as the UN. And sure, I will be the first to admit that what we have right now is far from perfect. But the reaction when something is imperfect should not be to say, okay, then let's throw it away altogether, but rather, okay, then let's improve on it. Then let's make it better. Clearly, international law is the only way to create a lasting peace. As I said at the start, if there's lawlessness, if there's anarchy between states, in theory, maybe there could be a ceasefire between everyone. There could maybe be a state where no one is currently fighting, but even that is unlikely. But even if it happened, war could always break out again. There is no other way to have right, but to have laws and to enforce those laws. And we should also acknowledge that we have come a long way. I mean, we are further than we were in Kant's time. And maybe we got there faster than imagined. I mean, Kant himself at some point says that maybe it might take another 144,000 years before we have eternal peace. Um, so some progress was made. We should not now give up. We should just simply push for more progress, for reform of the UN, like for example the Security Council with the permanent seats and the vetoes, to get properly past a world order created by and for imperial powers, to get to a truly equal world order. And rather than say, okay, everything sucks, we should look a little more closely and analyze more properly what sucks. And I think, well, what we can observe is we have international laws that might not be perfect, but they are something. The main issue is maybe not with the laws right now. And also, we have international courts, like the International Court of Justice, like the International Criminal Court. And again, they might not be perfect, but still, it's something. They are doing some good and important work. I would say that clearly the main issue right now is with the executive power. It is that internationally the laws or the court decisions are not enforced. A country like Israel or like Moscow can just simply completely disregard them. So if you go back to my lecture on what is justice to Kant, there I said that Kant describes several conditions people can live in. I discussed them there focused on the level of states, not the relationships between states, but it applies here too. I said that to Kant, the proper republic has law and force and freedom. The despotic state has laws and force but no freedom. In barbarism, you have only force, so simply arbitrary rule of the strong. You have neither laws nor freedom. In the state of nature, you have only freedom, and then you have also force, which will end the state of nature and lead to barbarism. But Kant also describes the possibility of having laws and freedom but no force, which is the state of anarchy, which is what you have in a failed state. And I would say this is the state the world is in right now. It's no longer, as in Kant's day, just the state of nature, so just freedom and force and no laws. Now it is laws and freedom, but no force. So now it is anarchy. And we need to push beyond that. But we should also recognize that this is normal in the history of the progress of right, and that this is not necessarily a sign of failure as such, or of a permanent failure, as bad as it is, but rather it was to be expected that we would go through such a phase. I mean, let's turn from the level of the right of nations, so what's called international law nowadays, back to the level of what Kant calls states law. Consider the history of right just within the state, not between states. Here it was the same. It took a very, very long time before we had the monopoly of power that the state has. Of course, in some states we still don't have that. In some states they are failed states, they are states in civil war. But at least in the Western world, nowadays we have mostly functioning states that have a monopoly of power and at least to some degree a rule of law. But this took a long time. if you look back, laws as such are pretty old. Laws within a state have existed for thousands of years now. I mean, you can go all the way back to antiquity, you can go all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, to the tablet of Hammurabi or whatever. Laws have been there for a while. But for a very long time, the state could not necessarily always enforce its own laws. For millennia and for centuries, up until very recently. I mean, in the Middle Ages, even the late Middle Ages, just like 500 years ago, here in Germany, for example, there were already quite developed laws, and there was also a legal system, a judiciary in place that was more developed than many people might expect. I mean, you could already study law. There were studied jurists that were quite sophisticated. But the issue was, if you turned to a court, maybe the court would rule in your favor, but then there was no state authority, no police or such that would enforce that ruling. So I don't know, maybe the court said, yes, you can let your cows eat on that meadow that is rightfully yours. The neighboring knight cannot drive your cows away. But then the neighboring knight would not care what the court said, right? And this is why you had feuding as a legal institution. So it was, in certain circumstances, even legal to engage in feuds, to use violence to get your rights, because there was simply no other way, right? Like nowadays you will hear about robber knights. That is mainly city propaganda. The fact is that many of those knights had ancient rights to collect tolls, to collect taxes from traders passing by their castles. But as the cities grew more powerful, they simply didn't care about the laws. They simply sent their trading caravans armed, and then refused to pay the tolls, which impoverished the knights. And so the knights said, well, but those tolls are our rights, and started maybe attacking those caravans, and then got branded as bandits by the cities, even though they were just trying to get what was rightfully theirs in many cases. And also, if knights had conflicts with one another, right? It was normal and to a certain degree accepted and even legal that you would attack the other's holdings, maybe drive his cattle away, maybe burn some of his peasants' huts, and so on. A court could rule in your favor, but you still had to use your own force to actually enforce that ruling, or otherwise the other party would not care. And only since maybe the 7th century or the 18th century, Kant's own day or shortly before that, since the days of absolutism, did the states in Europe really manage to gain the monopoly of power and to be able to enforce their laws. So the state's law, from there being law at the time of Hammurabi, long before Christ, to the point when there was also an effective executive power enforcing that law, in the last maybe 3 centuries or so, that was a very long development. And so that is something we should keep in mind. Unaufklärt people are often prisoners of the moment, because they are, once again, led by their senses. They are led by what they perceive, and then They see the world as it currently is, and they cannot imagine it otherwise. And so if they see, okay, international law currently does not work very well, then they will just dismiss it. We should rise above the moment, above our own age. We should have an overview of history as a whole and see the progress, the development that can take hundreds or even thousands of years. And since it worked to some degree within the states, there's no reason to dismiss the possibility that it can also work between the states. But of course, we need to push there. And I wish that people would learn a lesson or two from the fact that in the past they did not listen to their prophets, to their philosophers. They did not listen to people like Kant or like Fichte or like Nietzsche when they warned them. And the result were the world wars. The result was totalitarianism and genocide. And so, if people learned a lesson from that, maybe they would start listening to their philosophers now. Unfortunately, so far, the big advancements in international law, in the right of nations, have mostly been made after things have gone to hell, like after the last World War, because we did not listen sooner. And unfortunately, right now it looks like the next big advancement will again only be made after the next big crash. But it doesn't have to be like that. We can prevent such a catastrophe. We don't have to only learn our lesson once we got hurt. You can simply not touch the hot oven. You don't need to first burn yourself before you learn not to touch it. So this is what we should do, and this means that we should push for more, not for less international law. We should push for it being enforced. Of course, there's one added problem to what Kant had in mind because of the progress of technology, namely because of nuclear weapons. That makes what I said earlier a little harder, right? Like Kant could think that a federation of, let's say, 10 states could be secure from one state, could defeat one state in war. Of course, if this one state has nuclear weapons and these 10 states do not, then it might look a little different. But if we put that aside for now, because that would be enough to talk about another hour or so, then we can acknowledge that if the UN was serious about enforcing its and the international court's rulings, and if we have 193 member states, if 192 of them ganged up on one other state for not submitting to international law, we could end issues very quickly, right? I mean, imagine 192 states declaring war on Israel. I mean, it would not even need to be war. It would be enough in this case to just sanction Israel, to just completely isolate them. And I don't mean sanctioning like we usually do it, like we do it with Moscow, where we put some sanctions on them but still keep trading with them for a large part. No, I mean completely closing them off. Not allowing them to visit any other country, not allowing any trade. They would be done within days. But also, of course, we could declare war on them. And what would they do? How would they fight the whole world if the whole world chose to stand up against them? So that is what is needed. And for that reason, I would say what we need to do is we need to push against rogue states. Now, the term woke state has certainly been abused as a propaganda tool, right? Like Bush declared Iraq or Afghanistan a woke state to have a reason to attack them. It is a bit muddy, this concept, but I would say we should not simply call every despotic state a woke state. I mean, a tyranny might be bad for its own people, and we should always want it to end and to turn into a republic. Um, but if it does not go against international law and against the peace between nations, it is not a woke state. It is not a danger for all. So I would say, let's say a state like the military dictatorship of Sisi in Egypt. Sure, it is despotic, and hopefully it will fall soon. Um, but it does not act internationally as a woke state. No, I would reserve the term for those states that literally go woke, that go against the international order, that go against peace, that clearly leave the fold of the global community. So a state like, for example, Israel, which openly even declared the UN Secretary General a persona non grata. I mean, for that alone, they should have been kicked out of the UN. I mean, that is an open declaration basically of war on the UN, if you ask me. I mean, imagine within a country a governor of some state telling the president, you are not welcome here, you cannot enter this state. This would mean civil war. This would mean this state being in open rebellion. And consider Israel's actions, and I'm not even speaking of all the terrible actions towards Palestinians. I'm speaking of the blatant disregard for any international law, for any international order, for the sovereignty of any of its neighbors. I mean, Israel feels entitled to attack and bomb anyone around, right? Israel can just bomb Qatar. And no one dare tell me, oh, but they bombed Hamas members there. Yeah, but that's simply not how it can work. I mean, here we just see the double standards at play. Imagine if Moscow sent some of its diplomats or some of its leaders to, let's say, Turkey to negotiate there, and Ukraine would then bomb them in Turkey, in a sovereign neutral country. That would be a massive scandal. But when Israel does it to Qatar, it's okay. Or consider how Israel attacked Syria. I mean, this war-torn country, after 13 years of terrible civil war, finally gets rid of its despot, and the first thing Israel does is attack. It shows a lot about the Western hypocrisy that even this was completely accepted. It was not even treated as a big thing. It was not even headline news. It was not even something our leaders talked about. I mean, here you cannot say Israel has a right to defend itself. Here you cannot say Hamas attacked first, Hamas attacked hostages. Even the worst, even the most flimsy excuses don't work here. It was a completely unprovoked attack on a poor, war-torn neighboring nation. I mean, this, if nothing else, should have been a red line. This, if nothing else, should prove that Israel does not want peace. Israel does not want to treat its neighbors as equals. It does not want to be part of a common order with its neighbors, where all the countries, including Israel itself, submit to a higher law. I mean, Israelis openly say that international law, the UN, means nothing to them. They refuse to submit. But they don't just say it, they openly show it. I mean, in this situation, if they really wanted peace, they could have said, okay, we had a conflict with the previous regime for decades, but now let's try to start anew. Now let's extend a hand in peace. But no, they used this moment of weakness to just bomb Syria and to just invade it. And likewise, let's look at what they did to the Freedom Flotilla and the Sumut Flotilla. How they abducted citizens of other countries in international waters. Unarmed, peaceful, humanitarian aid workers. Again, you clearly see the double standards and the hypocrisy. I mean, imagine some ships being on their way to deliver aid to Ukraine and being abducted by Putin in international waters, and Putin then torturing citizens of other countries. That would be condemned by Western leaders, of course. That would essentially be a declaration of war to those countries, right? But when Israel does it, it's completely okay. Showing that our leaders care more about Israel than about us, their own citizens. I mean, this shows that we essentially have no rights, that our own states don't protect us. Israel can just abduct us in international waters and just torture us. I mean, if they can do it to some of us, they can do it to all of us. And if people were at all smart, I'm not even talking about moral, about caring about what is right. I'm just talking about caring about your own self-interest. They would rise up against this. They would be mindful of that famous quote of Niemöller, which applies not just within one state, but also globally, right? You cannot say, they are just coming for the Jews, or they are just coming for the communists, they are just coming for the trade unionists. I'm not a Jew or a communist or a trade unionist. No, but you are a human. Whatever can be done to one human can be done to all humans. And if you don't act right now, when you still can and when you still have allies, then it might be too late. Of course, it's not just Israel. Of course, also Muscovy is a woke state with its attack on Ukraine and its annexation of Ukrainian land. We cannot accept that this becomes the norm, that states can just attack others if they happen to be weaker and just annex their land. And here you mustn't be distracted by Moscovian propaganda. It doesn't matter what Ukraine might or might not have done internally. It doesn't matter if Ukraine might or might not have joined NATO. It doesn't even matter if the Ukrainian government might or might not have been toppled by the CIA. I mean, apart from all of this being propaganda, still, even if it all were true, it mustn't be a reason to invade a sovereign nation. If we accept this in one case, it becomes okay in every case. Then every nation can be attacked on the pretense that there was a coup or that it is mistreating its citizens or whatever. And of course, I don't even have to get started on the US being a woke state that abducts or assassinates presidents, that starts wars, that bullies other countries into submission. But even more importantly than just breaking individual specific international laws, they are more directly and more brazenly and more dangerously than anyone else attacking the global world order as such. Because it is normal for a woke state to not acknowledge the international law. And to be clear, I consider every single state that has not submitted to the Rome Statute a woke state by definition, even if it has not done any other woke actions yet. The Rome Statute being the contract, the international treaties through which states recognize the International Criminal Court and its jurisdiction. The US, Israel, Muscovy, also China, they are not part of the Rome Statute. I mean, why would you not be? Why would you not say, yes, I recognize an international criminal court that can persecute my citizens if they commit war crimes, if they commit genocide? Well, the only possible reason you would have to not submit to that court is if you want to keep the door open for maybe committing war crimes or genocides or so on. Simply by not submitting to the Rome Statute, a state is saying, I don't recognize any laws above me. I want to live in a lawless jungle where I can do whatever I want. So that should be enough to be classified as a woke state. But the US is doing more than that. The US actively sanctioned members of the International Criminal Court. I mean, never mind that they have a law in place that if an American citizen is ever taken to court, they can invade an allied nation, the Netherlands. They can invade The Hague just to free a war criminal. And that law, let me remind you, does not come from Trump, right? I keep saying Trump is only the first to say America first, but he's not the first to do America first. But no, now they actively sanctioned the International Criminal Court. And not just that court, they also sanctioned, of course, Francesca Albanese, right? The UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Simply for them doing their jobs. I mean, whatever they might accuse Albanese of, it's not like, yeah, of course she gets accused of anti-Semitism and whatever, but she's just doing her job, right? Again, a job that Israel refuses to acknowledge, just like it does not let the UN Secretary General enter, it does not let the special rapporteurs enter. This has not started with Albanese. Her predecessors also were banned from entering the occupied territories. And just to put that into perspective, the Taliban, the fucking Taliban, have allowed the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Afghanistan to enter Afghanistan and actually do his research there in the place that he is assigned to. So Afghanistan under the Taliban is less of a woke state than Israel is. But the point is, they cannot accuse Albanese of anything substantial. I mean, her mandate was renewed last year. It was reviewed, states could vote on it, and including the states allied with Israel, including the states defending Israel, they still did not vote her out of her mandate. Because she is doing her job. And they have nothing substantial to criticize her for. I mean, you would assume if she really did a bad job, if she really was one-sided or was lying, was spreading anti-Semitic libels, you could easily prove that her reports, right? She has to submit 2 reports every year, that her reports are wrong, that she is doing bad work, and then you could have kicked her out and replaced her based on that last year. It wasn't done. Instead, what is done is sanctioning her and the people working at the International Criminal Court of Justice. And those sanctions, I mean, don't think it's a small thing. Don't think, oh, okay, those people cannot enter the US again, that sucks a bit. No, I mean, the US dominates the international economy and banking system. The whole banking works through the US. So Albanese and the judges from the International Criminal Court, they cannot open a bank account anymore. Anywhere, even outside the US. They cannot receive money. Or pay their taxes or whatever. And likewise, no one who is an US citizen can help them, because that would be akin legally to helping a terrorist. They are on one level with a terrorist. Albanese's own daughter is born in the US, went to an American school. Her husband is working for an American organization. Her daughter has American citizenship, and now her own daughter cannot even give her a coffee without, according to American law, becoming a criminal. If you help her economically at all, in America you can be sentenced to paying up to $1 million or to spending up to 20 years in prison. These are the kind of sanctions they put on people representing international law. They put on them without any legal basis for this in international law. And these kinds of things, along with Israel spying on the International Criminal Court and using blackmail, using threats against the persecutor, which also should be enough for the whole world declaring war on Israel. I mean, I cannot possibly think of a higher crime than trying to undermine the International Criminal Court. And these are the worst offenses you could possibly imagine. Now, many people will say, okay, this might be bad, but isn't the genocide against the Palestinians even more bad? As bad as the sanctions against someone like Albanese are. But here it's important, this is part of Aufklärung, to not be caught up by sensuality, but to think in principles. Reason, and I gave a lecture about what is reason to Kant. Reason is the faculty of principles. Now, physically, to be sure, a genocide or other war crimes is much worse than these sanctions against individual people. If you just look, what does it do in the sensual world? How much harm, how much pain does it cause to how many people? Then sure, it is much, much worse. And Albanese would be the first to say, don't focus on me, focus on the suffering of the Palestinians. But if we think in principles, from the standpoint of wanting an international order, of wanting peace, then I would say the latter is much, much worse. The invasion of Ukraine or the genocide in Gaza, those are individual breaches of international law. Terrible breaches with terrible consequences. But the problem is not a law being broken. The true problem is when there's nothing done about laws being broken, or when there is not even a system of laws, right? I mean, within one state, what is worse? Committing a murder or disregarding and undermining the courts of the state? In the sensual world, judging by how much suffering you cause, the murder is of course worse. But within a functioning rule of law state, one single murder, no matter how terrible it is, does not threaten the order as such. The murderer can get caught, the murderer can be sentenced, he can be put into jail. But when you have no rule of law, when you have a lawless jungle, then it doesn't stay at one murder, then there can be more murders. And so undermining the rule of law as such, that is the worst thing you can do. Because here you are not murdering an individual, you are murdering the whole legal community, so to say. And so likewise, one war crime, even one genocide, something could be done about that if we had a rule of law globally. But if the rule of law as such is attacked, as the US is doing, then that leads to a world where all sorts of war crimes, all sorts of genocides, all sorts of wars become possible. And so this should not be accepted by anyone. And the terrible thing is that A, this is accepted, and B, other countries, the allies of the US and of Israel, including my country of Germany, even take part in it. I mean, take the treatment of UNRWA. Israel had just to come out and claim that 12 members of UNRWA were involved in the 7th of October attacks. I mean, never mind that they didn't provide proper proof. Never mind that they are known liars. The IGF had constantly lied. Never mind the fact that UNRWA has hundreds and thousands of people working for them. So even if 12 people have participated in a crime, that should not incriminate the organization as such. But the issue is that immediately, based just on these claims, many Western nations stopped their funding to UNRWA. And this mustn't be. Even if all of UNRWA, with every single person working for them, was indeed engaged in terrorism, this isn't how it should be done. Because UNRWA is a UN organization. If a state believes that there's an issue with UNRWA, then they should turn to the UN and they should bring it to the table and ask the UN to abolish it. But states cannot just arbitrarily choose when to support UN organizations and when not to. In that case, that means undermining the UN, undermining the global order. Same thing I already said with Francesca Albanese. If you think a special rapporteur is doing bad work or is abusing their mandate or whatever, you cannot just sanction them. You should turn to the UN, bring forth your criticism, and have the mandate revoked if you are right. Right? Otherwise, this is like being a vigilante, right? Seeking your own justice. Like within one state, if you think a politician is corrupt, if you think that a certain ministry in your state is doing bad work, you cannot arbitrarily just choose that you will no longer pay taxes to them or that you will shoot this politician. Because if you can do this, then anyone can choose this. And then we have chaos. Then the whole state breaks apart. No. If you think something is wrong, you can sue the politician for corruption. You can take him to court. Or you can simply wait till the next election and vote for somebody else. Try to change things. The point is, if we want the rule of law, then we have to follow the rules that are set by the laws. We have to follow the procedures that are set in place. We cannot just take matters into our own hands. Even if we are right materially, it would still mean we are formally wrong. We are wrong in the way we go about it. And so, if we want peace, and if we want to take Kant seriously, if we understand that peace means more than ceasefire, that peace means an end of lawlessness, peace means a state of rule of law where each is given his own and a guarantee of his own, and where peace is actually enforced, then we need to push for international law. We need to push against rogue states, to work with them as little as possible, to sanction them as much as possible, to not be their allies. Or if we ourselves live in such states, then push against that, push for a change, a radical change in politics, of course. We need, if we think that something is going wrong, that a rapporteur, an organization like UNRWA is abusing their power or doing bad work or whatever, we need to go about it in a lawful way and not just arbitrarily stop supporting them or whatever. And we need to push for international law, for which I would say states need to work together. I mean, Trump is trying with his Board of Peace to undermine the UN, to basically make it obsolete, to basically create a parallel structure where the rogue states and the despots can just make their own decisions amongst themselves for the world. And of course, this Board of Peace is grotesque. I mean, how can Israel, the perpetrator, the genocider, be on the Board of Peace while the Palestinians, the victims, are not? But since this is happening, well, no one is stopping others to create parallel structures to the UN. I mean, we already have the Hague Group. Several, mostly global South nations, like South Africa, like Colombia, came together to say, we stand behind the court in The Hague. We do want to enforce the arrest warrant on Israeli officials. And we will block shipping of weapons to Israel. Well, we should join that Hague Group. All the small nations and also the nations of middle size. Because let's face it, in a world of the US and Muscovy and also China and India doing whatever they want, pretty much everyone else is a small nation. I mean, my country of Germany, with its 85 million, is still a dwarf compared to those. We don't have to think that we will fare much better than other, even smaller countries. So it should be in our self-interest, never mind what our moral duty is, it should be in our self-interest as small and middle-sized nations to come together, both global North and global South nations. We should form new alliances, move away from being the vassals of the US and ally with those who have the same interests as us, that is, not being crushed by the big nations. And when the small and the middle-sized nations unite, then they could possibly have enough power to push even the bigger nations for reform. Alone, we are just getting crushed and being picked off one by another. We have to unite in pushing for global international law and the rule of law. And that means we have to stand behind the rule of law, whether we like it or not, right? Even when it is about our allies, like Israel. I mean, if within one state, as an individual, you want the rule of law, you need to want it for everyone. You cannot say, I don't accept the law when my friend or my brother broke the law. Well, if you don't want the law to apply to your brother, then it also won't apply to your neighbor when he decides to beat you up. It either applies to everyone or to no one. You either have rule of law or you have a lawless jungle. So we cannot say, oh, we want Putin to be arrested when there's an arrest warrant. We cannot criticize South Africa or Mongolia for not arresting Putin, but then say that we won't arrest Netanyahu. And of course, this also goes the other way. South Africa cannot say we should arrest Netanyahu and then say, but we won't arrest Putin. Either you stand behind international law or you don't. We must be consistent. This is the only way we can save it, or rather, the only way we can finally enforce it. We must be what every aufklärt person is, what every even remotely rational person is, even if you don't let rationality guide you in your purposes, even if you're not a moral person, even if you're just rational enough to use rationality as a tool, even if you're just a smart person, every rational person should be a justist, a fanatic of right, of justice, someone who really says what Kant says, what any true philosopher will say, fiat justitia et pereat mundus. Let there be justice even if the world perishes over it. International law and it being enforced must be more important to us than our allies or our ideologies or whatever. And if it isn't, then we are contributing to a lawless jungle in which we all will not survive. So that is what we need. A true federation of peace that actually enforces peace on everyone. That leaves the question how to get there. And that is also something that Kant has a word or two to say about. So that is a question I want to discuss next to close off the topic of the right of nations. How do we get to this federation of nations that would enforce the peace? What can we do in a situation when there's anarchy between nations, when this federation is not yet in place? My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenkubilay Altu, Thomas Deuringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.